Hello, I'm Chris Buccalo, and this is my inaugural, first, I suppose you'd say, video to be uploaded, or that will be uploaded into TikTok, and which I suppose could be titled, or should be titled, Discussion of the History of Salisbury, Massachusetts, as delivered in a park in Southern California at night. Being that I was born and raised in Salisbury, I have a kind of an abiding, long-standing interest in the history of that community, even though I now reside in Southern California. Thought I'd present a few historical tidbits, odds and ends, random facts to pique the interest of certain people who'd never heard of Salisbury, Massachusetts before, which I'll start by saying is the most northeasternly community in the Commonwealth or state of Massachusetts, and borders the Atlantic Ocean and the Merrimack River. Has a deep colonial history, including these are some fairly interesting stories connected to a gentleman who was one of the founders of Salisbury, who was a Puritan of that time, named Major Robert Pike. And Major Robert Pike, his story is somewhat unique amongst communities in New England, amongst those original towns and settlements, in that he had stood up for or protected and stood up against, I would say, I guess, the Salem witch hysteria, Salem witch trials, as well as the persecution of the Quakers, specifically Quaker women, and who, as the story goes, and the poet, who some of you may have heard of, John Greenleaf Whittier, had written a poem about it titled "How the Women Went from Dover," and the basic points of the story, the highlights would be that the Quakers being persecuted by the Puritans in the Massachusetts Bay Colony at that time in the 1660s were, in this particular instance, there was a magistrate, I believe, in Dover, New Hampshire, which at that time was connected to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and New Hampshire wasn't a separate colony as of yet. I don't believe so anyway. But and because Quakers were not approved of, they were not looked upon favorably by the Puritan kind of orthodoxy at the time. A group of Quaker women were they were ordered to be, and they were pulled along to the rear of an ox cart, tied and tethered to an ox cart, and had stripped to the waist, which is pretty outrageous to think about even today. But as far as even back in the 1660s, that's outrageous to think about. But they were to be flogged and to be whipped at each community, from Dover and what is today New Hampshire to Boston, I believe, but don't quote me on that one because I'm certainly not an expert on the story. And when they reached the town, the community, the settlement of Salisbury, Massachusetts Bay Colony, Major Robert Pike ordered that the warrant that was ordering that these women, that authorized these women to be whipped and for their Quaker beliefs, be torn up, and that they be released and clothed to the point that they had been, stripped to the waist, and of course not be flogged and so forth. And he later on, Major Robert Pike, also did speak out. He was one of the few people, to my knowledge, to have spoken out against the Salem witch trials and the witch hysteria, and was in contact with the magistrates in Salem, in that area, who were prosecuting the witches, who were overseeing that whole process in Salem. And he was one of the few people to have done so. And kind of he was a Puritan. He was of the once again of that orthodoxy at that time, and probably was maybe inflexible and stern in some of his views, but does stand out in that early history of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And I do know that Salisbury also, and pardon me for swerving this way and that with my phone, but I've never recorded a video like this, so just my first foray, as you might say, so fairly imperfect. But Salisbury is also known to have been a bit more of a welcoming community to Native Americans at that time, in the early or mid to late 1600s, as opposed to some of the other communities in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, maybe like Ipswich, or some of you've heard of Newbury or Salem or Gloucester, etc. Or communities like that. So some of the later history, Paul Revere did pass through. And actually, I didn't know this until just a couple of years ago, that he actually, before his famous midnight ride, he had actually ridden by horseback to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and had passed through Salisbury as well. And then also the women of Salisbury, Massachusetts, had melted down their pewter dishes, their silverware, etc., at a place that's now known as Potlid Square in Salisbury, to create musket balls for the Minutemen and militia of the time, who were going to the siege of Boston, and who were answering the call when the battles of Lexington and Concord had erupted. And I'll actually be going to Massachusetts for a visit in April, from April 13th to the 26th, to attend, or one of the things I'll be doing is to attend the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord. So that's a little bit of a connection to Salisbury and its role in that story, that larger story of the American Revolution, the outbreak of the American Revolution in Massachusetts. And Salisbury's, it's also known for Salisbury Beach, which is quite a notable, quite a famous, quite a well-known, possibly more on the East Coast and more in the New England and the Northeast, kind of tourist attraction. And my departed maternal aunt, Maria Miles, was very instrumental, a very key, important person working through the north of Boston, what was known, I believe it was called at that time, I don't know if it is anymore, the North of Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the Salisbury Chamber of Commerce, and was also involved in the Salisbury Historical Society as well. And she was very instrumental in drawing more and more attention and bringing more tourists attracting them to Salisbury Beach. And that's actually where I grew up. So that's about it for now. But more to come in the future. And it was very nice chatting with all of you and presenting some of this for the very first time. So I will see you next time. Bye.